Hey watercolor wizards, Hajra here. Thanks for parking your brushes here and let the epic art adventures begin. What follows is an excerpt from one of my real-time online classes. We're going to be doing at least 3 little demos, so make sure you have at least 3 little foxes drawn up. We're going to be doing one in watercolor and one in Inktense and one in gouache. This is all grisaille, okay? So today we're going to be working in tiling, and that's a different technique because we're going to be working very opaquely. Now, this Santa and this fox, when you put them next to each other, you can just see the comparison in the paint. There's a lot of white of the paper showing up here. No white of the paper showing up over here.
You want to explain what a tile is?
Yeah, so a tile is a little jigsaw piece that you put down. It's just a little color block, a little color piece. It's just basically exactly what the name says. And when you put that color piece down, you sort of puzzle together a painting that way. It's like just having these adjacent color pieces that you sort of put together. It's like putting a mosaic together. Make sure you have just a few blank pieces of paper, cardstock, so we can swatch our color schemes. We're going to be doing a complementary red-green color scheme for this. I've got my red right here, and this is my Inktense pans, and I'm just going to put a little bit of that red over here, and then swatch it in right there. Put a little bit down the center. When it's going to dry on the paper, it'll be waterproof, so don't let your edges get away from you, although you do have white to sort of correct it. And getting this nice purpley blackish shadow, so you can see that I won't be really needing to use a black for a shadow, and that's one of the reasons why complements are great, because, you know, they're directly across from each other on the wheel, so you have the most pop next to each other, adjacent to each other, and they make the darkest neutrals when mixed with each other, so they're great contrast schemes. Sennelier colors, you can use Sennelier or Schmincke, and I'm using a vermilion and I'm using a forest green. Now I chose the vermilion because it's opaque. Now if you choose a transparent color in watercolor, then you're going to get much more the result that I was getting with that fox that I was painting that I was showing you earlier, because there's just no way to make it look fully opaque. You see how opaque that looks on the paper? It looks just like it's a solid block that there was no white paper underneath it. Whereas when you do a transparent color, you can still see a little bit of the paper underneath it. And you can come back with another layer, but it starts to look a bit scratchy and streaky. One of the ways to prevent that is to add a little bit of white to it. So if you have a little bit of white paint, then you can add that in there. The best way to avoid that is just to use your most opaque colors. In a box, typically you do have colors that are more or less opaque. Okay, so in this case I chose my vermilion, which is quite opaque, and also my forest green, which is semi-opaque. Semi-opaque green, and both of these are going to be less opaque than a gouache that has more opacity to it naturally, but because these are opaque watercolors, you can sort of use them as gouache, and I have done that before. Creatorcolor Aqua Bricks, Aqua Sticks, and also I like to use Artgraph Taylor's Chalk, which isn't really Taylor's Chalk, it's kind of like a watercolor or gouache, and that works really well too. Okay, so I've got the red out there. Let me get the green on this side. Also a nice cool green. Now the warmer green you get, the less dark shadows you'll get. When you make your green warmer, you don't end up with very dark shadows. They're really yummy browns, but they don't get that black shadow, so it depends on what you want. I mean, either of them could work. Ooh, I like those. Those are nice colors. The Inktense dries on the paper, but it doesn't dry on the palette. Like, it's got an acrylic binder, but it does re-wet like watercolor and gouache, which is why I got it, because I don't like acrylic paints that you just have to throw away, and plus the cleanup is a huge amount of hassle. I'm going to make the eyes a really nice dark shadow, and this is going to dry waterproof, so I'm going to go ahead and put in that triangular shape. See how there's little diamond-shaped eyes there? And a little highlight pulled out of the center. Okay, so that's exactly what we're going to be doing here for the eyes. Lift out a little bit of the eyeball right there. We're just going to give it a little bit of an impression of a triangle and move on. Otherwise, we'll not get through these mediums. This essentially is a tiny color tile. Now, it's not very different from glazing at this point, because you could be starting your watercolor like this too, you know, and in fact you might actually not glaze with your watercolor. Maybe you're already doing something that's kind of like tiles and you don't know. If you compare glazing and tiling, maybe you're doing something that's in the middle. So those are almost dark blackish and that purpley color between the red and the green Inktense that I'm getting here. Okay, I'm gonna do the exact same thing for the nose. It's this purpley color you get with a cool green. Now the warmer you have your red, the cooler you're gonna have a green for its complement, because remember the temperatures are opposite in complements. So a yellow is warm, a purple is cool, a red is warm, a green is cooler, a blue is cool, and an orange is warmer. And depending on where you move on the wheel, you're going to end up having even cooler or warmer temperatures depending on how you move around. So in this case, we used a warm red, which means that our complement is going to be a cool green. So if you used a warm green, it wouldn't be a true complement. You can still use it, but it's just not going to give you as much contrast. And just blending off into the top there. Now for an area this small, you can, if you wanted to, just lose it and then come back in with a white highlight, later, or you can save it, you know, it's up to you. And we're gonna do the same thing with the shadows here. Okay, now we're just gonna be putting in these tiles. Now try to have a second brush on hand. I've got a filbert. Filbert is great for blending tile edges. If you don't have one, then a flat or an angle will work just as well. I feel like this is a nice red area here. So we're gonna do that. Now the only time we're gonna lighten this up is if we actually want the value light there, and we can either come back in and plug a white into that area, or you can use the white of the paper. So that's the only place where I'm going lighter. For the ear area back there, I'd like to have a darker color tile. Okay, so I'm just gonna let it be green. A little bit of a contaminated green, but I really, like I said, would like to see some of the identity of that green. It makes it very artsy. Now I'm softening the edge there, just like that. That's a soft tile edge. So it would naturally have dried in that one hard line edge, right? So I'm actually tapping it. So this is just a damp brush with almost no water in it. Once I get past my first layer, I can't keep bringing water in when you do those blended edges. So if you want it to layer opaquely, you actually have to pay attention to the medium and, you know, honor its limitations actually. 3 tiles right there. A dark green one, a red one, and this is a semi-transparent tile. Remember the first tile that I showed? And it's okay for it to be semi-transparent. It doesn't have to be fully opaque, but we're not glazing. See, we're not going over in layers. I'm actually just chopping on pieces, you know, next to each other. This Inktense is an acrylic medium basically, and it's waterproof. Maybe we can carve in a bit of an outline. You can, if you wanted to, just put those in as color tiles too. Okay, so I'm finding this tile here. So if you want to see the differences between these mediums, then for sure check that out in other videos and other demos that I've done. I have a great bell pepper demo on YouTube that shows all 3 of these mediums being compared, but I'm using them all like gouache today. A lot of water, and then put the color in. It gives you that nice bloomy edge, and that's a nice soft edge, and it's great for internal fur. You saw me do it with that grisaille fox piece, but it's not as useful in gouache after the first layer. You can't use that much water. And I'm going to try to block these in fast. These are going to be more impressionistic foxes. Putting in another streaky tile. Now my tiles don't have to be square shaped. They can be geometric shapes, they can be random organic shapes, it can be slivers. So nowhere does it say that I have to do a tile and it has to be a boxy rectangle. It can be whatever you want it to be as far as the shapes go. Fun to throw in some green here and there, again in the shadow with the white. We're going to use it just for highlights, because if you used it for everywhere, you would probably just end up with pink. But we've got just 2 colors to work with, and essentially 3, because we've got the shadow color that they make in between. Greenish purplish color into this tail area. Want it to look more sort of black. So this is where I'm going to have to bring in some white gouache, and you should have that out on a separate palette or in a separate little well or something. And go ahead and throw that in, and it softens up your lines here. Dry brushing with that made it so that it just didn't give me the lines I wanted, so I'm going to come back in with the white to lighten it up. Alright, let's get that dark in there. Putting in some white. Just a white shaped tile there. It looks like half a circle. And I'm going to put another one in right here, because I can see that it's also fading to white in my reference here. If you want to see another example of me doing this kind of opaque painting, Inktense, to make it look like gouache, also watch that toucan video that I did on YouTube. It's also for free. That's what made me realize I wanted to teach a class like this. Do a modeling texture. So, you know, tap at it instead of smoothing away at it, and it'll give you more of that look. You have to do different brush strokes to get different texture. Make it nice and opaque. You don't want it to be less than half and half consistency. You want it to be at least a half and half or heavy cream consistency. Trying to lose that line a bit. Speckle in. In this case, whenever you're doing fur outlines, the more random the better. Not just you, but I can also come back and polish them after the stream, and often I do. Just a little bit. Sometimes just that last 5% of tweaks that you can look at it with fresh eyes transforms it into more of a professional looking painting. So don't ever put a piece aside and not come back and look at it at least once with fresh eyes. And so the key to this really is your brush control, so not to have that much water in it, and also to make your paint opaque. Kind of fades back to a powdery finish. That's why you want to sort of avoid white in large amounts, except for in your highlights, and then leave more of a highlight towards the center and also coming towards the muzzle. Giving him the same 3 trapezoidal things that you would for a human eyelid, because underneath all of that fur, he's a mammal and he's got very similar structure in some ways to us. Now, if you want to, like I said, even lose completely any feeling of an eyeball there, that doesn't matter. What's more important is that you get those dark, semi-nappy eyes that he has here that are really sort of the focal point of this piece. Just like with the Zorn Widow study, if you go back onto YouTube and look at that, I emphasize the shadow outside of the face, to the left of the veil. I did it for that reason, because it spotlights the profile. So same thing for here. Always make your darkest darks and your lightest lights in your focal point area. We're gonna do this fox again, but now we're gonna do him in gouache. All right, so I'm putting all this paint on here. So I'm using my Criticolor Aqua Bricks as my green gouache, and also as my red gouache here. And if you have, like I said, tubes or pan colors, then you can use those too. In the center, it's gonna give me that nice, beautiful, purpley black. So here's a very opaque black. Get into the other side. So this is a very opaque tile. The genuine half and half consistency just from the starting point. Half and half or heavy cream consistency now. I'm gonna get this more of a diamond shape. I think it actually looks better when you really abstract it down to a diamond shape when he's sleeping. Now this is gonna be different. This is not waterproof. This is gouache. This is opaque watercolor. It's got the same binder as watercolor, gum arabic or honey or glycerin. As if I decided to do a dark color here, okay, I'm fanning it so it dries off real fast. Now if I come back over the top and try to glaze, look what it does, okay? So this is not intense. This is not going to work for that. Such a tiny patch, and yet it lifted up immediately, even though it was the first piece of paint on the paper. We're going to be starting with less water and staying that way. And if you want soft tile edges, then while it's still wet, you can put another tile on top of it, or you can come back later. That's the beauty of gouache. Do stuff. These are sort of soft seamed tiles. If I wanted to do my tiles completely hard, I could do that too. So you can come back and fix those tile edges later. There's no stress. It's much more like working with oil. And put in that translucent tile all the way up. Okay, like a local color stain. And this is again hot press arches. So you can see that there's no difference in the paper, but the medium has made a big difference. So make sure you have a clean well for clean water and a dirty well for the rinsing water, because as you bring that into your palette, it's not going to do you any favors. It'll look more soft than the Inktense. And the toucan I did was fully opaque. Now it's starting to get lighter and less opaque. So now you can see, when I start to see the green a little bit more light like this, semi-opaque already, and it's getting lighter. And, you know, as it starts to dry brush, you know, you can start to see the identity more. Everything's strength is also its weakness. You know, it's just like a superhero. This is not waterproof, so some people find that super irritating. They have a hard time figuring out how to control it, how to blend it. So you have to sort of find what the limitations of the medium are and then work within those limitations to get what you want. Just as long as you're creative about it, dedicated to learning the different things that the medium can do, you can end up with achievable goals that you can hit with any of these mediums. So this floofy tail area is where I'm trying to get a little bit of the white into the highlight. So it's basically a tile edging into a white tile, and that could be white paper or it could be white paint. A lot of this is about constant correcting. Painting is just a constant series of corrections. I'm going to go ahead and put that tear duct in on this side, just a dot. Just a dot on this side. And then also, in this case, instead of making that eyeball, I will color the rim of the lid, like I said, was what was showing up in the fox, actually. So that'll give it a different expression. And I like the other one too, but just to let you know, you can do it in different ways. I mean, doing this fox 3 times, you might as well give them a little bit of variety. Make the eye come down a bit further as a result of that, so you can see those popped in areas over there. Poke in a little bit more white, and then over here I feel like I just want to have a sharper highlight right there. You and I both can't have fresh eyes right now. We're going to be painting this fox 3 times. By the time we're done with him, he's gonna be very not fresh. So you have to come back and look at this in some ways. Get some more of that red over here. I'm putting some of this white back into here, so poking in some of this hair around here. Soften off whatever you want with that. Again, that's gouache, so you can lift it right back up and make it nice, pebbly soft. I did those polar bears semi-translucently in gouache. So if you want to see an example of me doing fur with gouache, that is semi-transparent effects. So you can watch that polar bear video again, that's on YouTube. It's one of my older videos.
Does paper make a difference with gouache and Inktense like it does with watercolor?
It doesn't make as much of a difference with gouache because gouache is so movable. You can sort of, you know, not really care about the sizing as much as you do with a watercolor. But you definitely, for Inktense, it also depends on how much water the paper can take and how much water you're using, because you can use Inktense more like gouache and make it more like we did it with less water, and you can also use it with more water. So it depends on how many glazing layers you're sort of interested in. That's what's going to determine for the Inktense is how are you using it. But for the gouache, definitely you can use cheaper papers in a way that you cannot use with watercolor. This one is our watercolor scheme, and I'm going to be using vermilion because it's opaque, you know, so choose an opaque color like vermilion or cadmium red. My green is a forest green. Remember, I wanted a cool opaque green, but just make sure you get something that's opaque or semi-opaque, because if you don't, then when you add a lot of white to it, it'll turn into a pastel fox, and that's fine, but maybe that's not what you want for the look. And also, because we're using opaque colors, it's going to blend off easier. If you use a really transparent staining color, it'll sink right in. So that's the difference, is that if you get a nice opaque color, it can work like gouache, and also it reblends easier. Because this is an expensive Sennelier pan, and I think that pan by itself is like, you know, several dollars. It's going to be like a $10 pan or something. That's why it's not always preferable, unless you've got cheaper watercolors, to use your opaque watercolors as gouache, because you will use up those pans really fast. Whereas those Cretacolors are more cost effective, and same thing for those art graphs, they're more cost effective. So I'm bringing up the opacity. Half and half heavy cream consistency. It'll be harder to do with watercolor because the pan formula is just naturally thinner, so you're going to have to just do a little bit more layering, and it's going to stain a bit more too, okay? So gouache, where it doesn't stain and moves around more, it's going to stain a bit more with this. This other piece that I started, you can see that I was tiling, but I was doing tiling that was semi-translucent, okay? So that's the other way. This is a Windsor red and a serpentine green. You get the warmer green, and it gives you a warmer olive shadow. The cooler green, it's the best contrast because it's a pure complement, but sometimes you want near complements for a more subtle shadow. You can see from these examples that the one that looks the best opaque is gouache, and the one that looks the best transparent is watercolor. The best idea is to use your watercolors transparent glazes and in layers like grisaille and stuff like that, and also then to use your gouache very opaque. And you can use your gouache semi-opaque too. You can make it lighter. I've done that before, and while it's great for some pieces, for other pieces that's not at all what you want. So this is not a near complement. This is practically a perfect complement for any of these that are going fully black like that. If you wanted to make it a near complement, so you got those olive greens and more subtle shades, then definitely you can do that too. Color the whole thing in, like so. Again, try not to lose that diamond trapezoidal shape. That's what's really making it look like a fox. And just in that center area, lift a little bit of that. And it'll make it look like you can kind of see a little bit of his eye there. You can kind of already see the differences, though. They show up a lot, like they're unavoidable. There's a lot of differences between these mediums. You know, one of them is waterproof, that's the Intense. You know, one of them is more glazy and sinks in more, even when it's not waterproof, and that's the Watercolors. And you can see that even when you're using the opaque watercolor, that it'll dry harder edged than the gouache when you soften it. So it depends on what you're going for. For me, I feel like I just want to have anything that I'm painting, if it's transparent, to be the most transparent. If I want it to be opaque, then I want it to be the most opaque. Like, I want it to be the best of each one. Otherwise, why am I putting all this effort into anything, right? The aqua bricks especially are really quite affordable. Same thing for the art graph Taylor's chalk ones. I did that line decker study. You can see it on Instagram. Just look at how opaque that piece is, and it looks very oily, okay? It looks super oily. You can't get that look with watercolor. You just wouldn't be able to. I mean, you can force it and it'd take you a huge amount of time, but why would you do that? Why would you not just get yourself a gouache set once and for all and solve that problem? Also depends on how comfortable you are. Like, suppose you have absolutely no facility in gouache right now and you don't want to buy another gouache set, then that's fine, you know? Then just make your watercolors do both. All comes down to what you're comfortable with, what you can afford, how much practice you've had, and that'll continue to change over time. Alright, so that's my watercolor fox. The gouache would be the most sort of naturally fast to do with tiling. After that, you can do watercolor, and it'll be the second best to be naturally fast. All three of these were opaque, but you can see the differences. I've said this about Intense, and look at how much this has dried back. And when I first started this, I really did feel like it was dark enough to be dark here. And instead, I just have to come back with more of this and try to blend this out, because it does feel like it dries back so light in comparison to the other ones. It's a good dry ink to have around, because I had bottled inks, and these are still light fast, they're still artist quality. Probably also lay off the white a bit. And also, this happened to be the warmest color. So this is a vermilion, this watercolor. So as a result of that, it's going to look the warmest. Here's another option here where the red is actually the coolest red of the ones that we've looked at, but it also happens to have a much warmer green, and as a result of that, the whole painting's gonna have a different tone. Again, a sort of delicate little vintagey tone to it. So coming back to that tired old Santa and fox example, that's full tiling and opaque, and this is full grisaille and glazing for watercolor. And what we did here today was we made tiles with all of these mediums and tried to work with all of them pretty much opaque. You can make all of these look pretty much identical. These peppers are looking pretty much the same, and I did this one in watercolor, this one in gouache, and this one in Intense. So if you want to make them look pretty much the same, you could have done the same thing with the foxes. Zinc white and titanium white have a bluish tint to them, just like black does, so they'll cool a color down. They don't just lighten it, they also cool it, okay? Same thing for when you add a black. So black will darken a color, but it'll also cool it. This piece is cooler for having used a white. Check out my website for all my important links on one page to support my art creation and instruction. Thanks for parking your brushes here and wishing you all epic art adventures.